The morning sun cast long shadows across the steel matting of Laloki Airfield on December 27, 1942, as ground crews pulled camouflage netting from twin-boomed silhouettes. 12 Lockheed P-38 Lightnings of the 39th Fighter Squadron, 35th Fighter Group, sat fueled and armed, their distinctive twin tails gleaming in the tropical dawn. Port Moresby, New Guinea, the lightning strikes. Intelligence had just arrived from coast watchers reporting a major Japanese air raid developing. Multiple formations were approaching Buna, estimated at 40 aircraft with fighter escort confirmed. Captain Thomas Lynch checked his instruments and signaled his flight. Time to intercept was 30 minutes. Among his pilots was Second Lieutenant Richard Bong, temporarily attached from the 49th Fighter Group's 9th Squadron, still waiting for their own P-38s to arrive. What none of them knew was that this morning would mark the beginning of a fundamental shift in Pacific air combat. The Japanese pilots approaching Buna had encountered P-38s only briefly in recent weeks. Their intelligence reports remained uncertain about the strange twin-boomed fighters' capabilities. Within hours, that uncertainty would transform into shocked recognition. The Imperial Japanese Navy's elite fighter pilots had dominated Pacific skies for 13 months. The Mitsubishi A6M-0's legendary maneuverability had become the nightmare of Allied pilots. Turn radius of 950 feet, climb rate to 6,000 feet in 7 minutes 27 seconds, maximum speed of 331 miles per hour. These statistics had translated into overwhelming victory in China and the early Pacific campaigns. American pilots flying Bell P-39 Aerocobras and Curtiss P-40 Warhawks had learned through blood and loss that engaging a Zero in a turning fight meant almost certain death. But the P-38 Lightning represented a revolutionary philosophy of air combat. Twin Allison V-1710 engines, each producing 1,150 horsepower. Turbo superchargers maintained power at altitudes where other fighters struggled for breath. Maximum speed of 414 miles per hour. Service ceiling of 44,000 feet. Concentrated in the nose was a devastating armament package. One 20mm Hispano cannon and 4 50-caliber Browning machine guns, all firing straight ahead without the convergence problems of wing-mounted weapons. Lieutenant Richard Bong had studied these specifications during his training at Hamilton Field, California. A farm boy from Poplar, Wisconsin, who'd learned to fly in the civilian pilot training program. Bong understood that the Lightning's advantage lay not in turning with Zeros, but in avoiding the turning fight altogether. Speed, altitude, firepower. Strike from above, dive through the enemy formation, climb back to altitude. These tactics demanded discipline, patience, and complete rejection of traditional dogfighting instincts. Aboard the approaching Japanese formation, veteran pilots from the land-based air groups flew their standard escort patterns. The mixed force of Mitsubishi A6M-0s, Nakajima Ki-43 Oscars, and Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers represented the cream of Japanese naval aviation. These pilots had swept across the Pacific from Pearl Harbor to the Dutch East Indies, rarely meeting serious opposition. American fighters typically struggled above 15,000 feet, and their inferior climb rates made them predictable targets. The morning's mission appeared routine: escort the dive bombers to Buna, suppress any Allied fighter opposition, return to base. Japanese pilots had noticed the occasional twin-boomed aircraft in recent weeks, but hadn't yet grasped their significance. Some thought they were reconnaissance planes or light bombers. The possibility that Americans had developed a fighter specifically designed to negate the Zero's advantages hadn't occurred to Japanese tacticians. But at 18,000 feet, the P-38 formation held every advantage. Captain Lynch led the attack, pushing his Lightning into a dive that quickly exceeded 400 miles per hour. Behind him, Bong and the other pilots selected their targets. The concentrated firepower from the nose-mounted weapons allowed them to open fire at ranges exceeding 400 yards, well beyond the effective range of the Zero's light armament. Lynch's guns destroyed an Oscar in the opening pass. The Japanese fighter simply disintegrated under the impact of 20mm cannon shells and 50-caliber bullets. As Lynch climbed back to altitude, Zero pilots attempted to follow but found their aircraft shuddering violently as they approached 400 miles per hour in the dive. Warning bells sounded in their cockpits as they neared their structural limits. Lieutenant Bong spotted a Zero attempting to engage Lynch and rolled into a deflection shot. His first combat burst found its mark, sending the Zero spinning earthward in flames. As he pulled up, 3 more Zeros converged on his position. Bong pushed his throttles forward and dove away, accelerating to over 450 miles per hour. The Japanese pilots could only watch as the strange twin-boomed fighter disappeared into the distance, completely untouchable. Pulling out of his dive just above the jungle canopy, Bong spotted a Nakajima dive bomber recovering from its attack run. A short burst from 100 yards sent it crashing into the jungle in a ball of flame. These were Bong's first 2 confirmed victories, the beginning of what would become the highest-scoring American ace career of the war. The engagement lasted less than 10 minutes. The 39th Squadron claimed 12 Japanese aircraft destroyed, including victories by Lynch, Bong, and Second Lieutenant Karl Planck. No P-38s were lost. Japanese after-action reports expressed confusion and alarm. Pilots described aircraft possessing impossible speed and climbing ability, engaging from beyond normal combat range. The comfortable world of horizontal maneuvering combat, where Japanese pilots excelled, had suddenly become a vertical battlefield, where speed and altitude determined survival. This transformation sent shockwaves through Japanese Naval Aviation Headquarters at Rabaul. Intelligence officers scrambled to reassess the P-38's capabilities. The aircraft's twin-engine configuration had led them to categorize it as a heavy fighter, unsuitable for air-to-air combat. They hadn't anticipated that American engineers had created something entirely new, a fighter that achieved superiority through vertical maneuvering rather than horizontal agility. The technical revolution represented by the P-38 became increasingly clear through subsequent encounters. The Lightning's turbo superchargers allowed it to maintain full power at altitudes where normally aspirated engines lost 50% of their output. Its diving speed approached the sound barrier faster than any Japanese aircraft could follow without structural failure. Its ability to convert speed to altitude meant P-38 pilots could regain their perch above enemy formations within seconds of an attack. On January 7, 1943, the reality of this new threat became undeniable. 9 P-38s escorting bombers over Leh encountered approximately 20 Japanese fighters. Traditional tactical doctrine suggested the outnumbered Americans should adopt defensive positions. Instead, the P-38s climbed to 25,000 feet and initiated diving attacks from positions the Japanese couldn't reach. Lieutenant Richard Bong, now flying regularly with the 39th Squadron while awaiting his unit's P-38s, demonstrated the Lightning's lethal efficiency. Diving from altitude, he destroyed a Ki-43 Oscar with a deflection shot at 300 yards. As Japanese fighters attempted to climb toward him, Bong executed a chandelle that carried him back to 20,000 feet, completely outside their engagement envelope. From this perch, he selected another target and repeated the process. The geometry of vertical combat was something Japanese pilots had never encountered. While a Zero could outturn any American fighter, it couldn't match the P-38's speed in a dive without catastrophic structural failure. It couldn't follow the Lightning's zoom climb without stalling. It couldn't catch a P-38 that chose to disengage using superior speed. The horizontal battlefield, where Japanese pilots reigned supreme, had been replaced by a 3-dimensional arena, where altitude and velocity trumped turning radius. Veteran Japanese pilots struggled to adapt. Their entire training emphasized close-range maneuvering combat, getting on an opponent's tail through superior turning ability. Against the P-38, these tactics were useless. By the time a Zero pilot maneuvered into firing position, the Lightning was already a mile away, and climbing through altitude bands the Japanese fighter couldn't reach. The psychological impact proved as devastating as the tactical disadvantage. Japanese pilots who had enjoyed qualitative superiority since the war's beginning found themselves helpless against an enemy that refused to fight on their terms. The stress of constantly scanning above, knowing death could plummet from altitudes they couldn't reach, eroded morale. Some pilots developed combat fatigue symptoms previously unknown in Japanese military culture. By February 1943, the P-38 presence in the Southwest Pacific was expanding rapidly. The 9th Fighter Squadron of the 49th Fighter Group finally received their Lightnings. The 80th Fighter Squadron of the 8th Fighter Group began transitioning from P-39s to P-38s. The 475th Fighter Group, an all-Lightning unit, was forming in Australia. Each new squadron that arrived had studied the combat reports of pilots like Lynch and Bong, refining tactics that maximized the P-38's advantages. The training programs instituted by squadron commanders emphasized altitude discipline above all else. Altitude is life insurance became the mantra. Speed is life. Pilots learned to resist the instinct to turn with enemy fighters, instead maintaining high velocity and using vertical maneuvers. The high-speed yo-yo allowed a P-38 to convert excess speed into altitude while reversing direction. The barrel roll attack used the Lightning's roll rate to maintain guns on target while preserving momentum. Japanese attempts to counter these tactics proved largely ineffective. The Kawasaki Ki-61 Tony, with its liquid-cooled engine and heavier armament, was designed specifically to engage high-altitude American bombers. But even the Tony couldn't match the P-38's performance above 20,000 feet. The Nakajima Ki-44 Shoki emphasized speed and climb rate over maneuverability, but still fell short of the Lightning's capabilities. Intelligence reports from Japanese units revealed growing desperation. Pilots were instructed to avoid combat with P-38s unless possessing overwhelming numerical superiority and advantageous position. Even then, engagement was discouraged above 15,000 feet, where the Lightning's performance advantage became insurmountable. Some units attempted to lure P-38s into low-altitude turning fights, but American pilots had learned to maintain discipline and refuse engagement on unfavorable terms. The industrial dynamics compounded Japan's tactical disadvantage. Lockheed's production line in Burbank, California, was achieving remarkable efficiency. By March 1943, the factory was producing 10 P-38s per day. Each aircraft required approximately 37,000 man-hours to construct, but American industrial capacity made this investment sustainable. Japanese aircraft production, constrained by material shortages and bombing damage, struggled to replace combat losses. Training disparities widened the gap further. American P-38 pilots arrived in theater with 300 or more flight hours, including 50 hours in type. They had practiced vertical tactics, gunnery, and formation flying extensively. Japanese replacement pilots rushed through abbreviated training programs, averaged less than 100 total flight hours. Many had never flown above 20,000 feet before encountering P-38s in combat. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea in March 1943 demonstrated the P-38's strategic impact. Lightnings flew top cover for Allied bombers attacking a major Japanese convoy. When Zero escorts rose to intercept, the P-38s executed perfect vertical tactics, destroying multiple Japanese fighters while preventing any effective defense of the convoy. 8 transport ships and 4 destroyers were sunk, dealing a crushing blow to Japanese reinforcement efforts. Among the P-38 pilots establishing dominance over the Solomons, several names became legendary. Captain Thomas Lynch of the 39th Fighter Squadron refined vertical tactics to an art form, eventually scoring 20 confirmed victories before his death in March 1944. Lieutenant Richard Bong continued his remarkable scoring streak, demonstrating an uncanny ability to position his P-38 for perfect deflection shots. In August 1943, a new name entered the Lightning Ace roster. Lieutenant Thomas Maguire, assigned to the newly formed 475th Fighter Group's 431st Fighter Squadron, scored his first victories on August 18 over Wewak. Flying top cover for bombers, Maguire's flight encountered approximately 20 Japanese fighters. In his first combat engagement, Maguire shot down 2 Ki-43 Oscars and 1 Ki-61 Tony, becoming an ace in just 2 days after adding 2 more victories on August 21st. Maguire's combat philosophy emphasized aggressive vertical tactics and precise gunnery. He would eventually write a manual titled Combat Tactics in the Southwest Pacific area that became required reading throughout the 5th Air Force. His techniques included the Maguire roll, a high-speed barrel roll that maintained offensive position while preserving momentum, and the vertical reverse, using the P-38's climb capability to reverse positions with a pursuing enemy. The strategic implications of P-38 dominance extended beyond individual combat. The Lightning's range exceeding 1,000 miles with drop tanks allowed American planners to strike Japanese bases previously considered secure. Fighter sweeps could reach Rabaul from New Guinea, achieving air superiority before bombers arrived. The ability to escort bombers throughout their entire mission profile eliminated the vulnerability windows that Japanese interceptors had previously exploited. On April 18, 1943, the P-38's unique capabilities enabled one of the war's most significant missions. American codebreakers had intercepted Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's travel itinerary for an inspection tour of Solomon Islands bases. The mission to intercept him would require a 435-mile overwater flight from Guadalcanal, precise navigation without landmarks, and exact timing to arrive at the intercept point when Yamamoto's aircraft passed through. Only the P-38 possessed the range, speed, and navigation equipment for such a mission. Major John Mitchell of the 339th Fighter Squadron, 347th Fighter Group, led 16 Lightnings on the longest fighter intercept mission of the war. Flying at wave-top height to avoid radar detection, maintaining radio silence throughout, the P-38s navigated by dead reckoning for over 2 hours. Mitchell's navigation proved perfect. At Aero 934, exactly as planned, Yamamoto's two Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers appeared with their 6-0 escorts. Captain Thomas Lanphier Jr. and Lieutenant Rex Barber rolled into their attack as the top cover engaged the escorts. Barber's concentrated fire sent the Admiral's bomber crashing into the jungle, killing Japan's most brilliant naval strategist and dealing a devastating blow to Japanese morale. The psychological impact rippled through Japanese military leadership. If American fighters could reach out across hundreds of miles of ocean with such precision, no one was safe. The myth of Japanese invincibility, already damaged by Midway and Guadalcanal, suffered another crushing blow. The P-38 had demonstrated not just tactical superiority, but strategic reach that Japanese planners hadn't anticipated. Following Yamamoto's death, Japanese fighter tactics underwent desperate revision. Pilots were instructed to attack P-38s only when possessing altitude advantage, numerical superiority of at least 3-1, and surprise. Even then, engagement was to be brief, with immediate disengagement if the initial attack failed. These defensive measures signaled a dramatic departure from the aggressive tactics that had driven Japanese fighter operations. Fresh Japanese aircraft designs couldn't regain the upper hand. The Kawasaki K-84 Frank, introduced in late 1943, managed to keep pace with the P-38 at middle altitudes, yet remained outmatched in the thin air above 25,000 feet. The Mitsubishi J2M Raiden prioritized rate of climb and high-altitude capability, but this came at the expense of range and turning ability. Both fighters arrived in insufficient quantities to challenge American air dominance. By autumn 1943, the shift had become absolute. Daylight sorties by Japanese forces over the Solomon Islands had largely disappeared. Naval warships ventured out solely under darkness. Resupply missions to isolated positions relied on submarines and swift destroyers racing through the night. What had once been a formidable Japanese naval aviation force, dominating across the Pacific during 1941 and 1942, now operated in shadow. Fear replaced pride. The numbers painted a grim picture. Since the P-38 began major combat operations, Japanese fighter squadrons in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea endured devastating casualties. The 211th Air Group started 1943 with 80 pilots. By December, merely 10 originals remained. The 204th Air Group watched 70% of its pilots vanish within 6 months. The 532nd Air Group was pulled from the fighting entirely, having lost 4/5 of its machines in just 4 months of clashes with American P-38 units. American losses, though substantial, could be replaced. P-38 squadrons regularly achieved 5-to-1 kill ratios or better. Crucially, downed American aviators frequently got picked up by rescue crews and returned to action. Japanese pilots hitting the water typically perished. Damaged American fighters made it back to maintenance shops for repairs and further service. Japanese machines sustaining comparable damage went abandoned, spare parts simply unavailable. The manufacturing gap kept expanding. By late 1943, Lockheed had produced more than 2,000 P-38s for active theaters. Output hit 400+ monthly. Japanese factories churned out barely 500 fighters of all types monthly, and many stayed in the home islands for defense. The mathematics of attrition grew relentless. Pilot preparation diverged sharply as well. P-38 aviators arriving in late 1943 brought thorough schooling in vertical maneuvers, instrument work, and extended navigation. Numerous had trained against captured enemy fighters, learning precisely what their adversaries could and couldn't accomplish. Japanese replacement aviators raced through shortened curriculums, going from 2 years down to 6 months, showing up with scant preparation and zero familiarity with lightning opposition. The psychological component mattered enormously. Japanese aviators who started confident in their air superiority found themselves powerless against a machine they couldn't reach. Correspondence discovered during later island operations showed mounting despair. Certain pilots recounted vivid dreams of twin fuselage silhouettes plunging from above. Others begged for assignments away from flying rather than encounter the P-38 once more. American aviators demonstrated the reverse, piloting with mounting self-assurance. The Lightning delivered everything: velocity, altitude, striking force, and operational range. They chose engagement timing and method, never losing control of the fight. This psychological advantage equaled technical prowess. Assured pilots fly harder, accept smart risks, and accomplish more. Richard Bong personified this assurance. By April 1944, he'd eclipsed Eddie Rickenbacker's First World War tally of 26 confirmed kills. His fighting approach reached near perfection. Bong ascended to 30,000 feet, beyond reach of opposing fighters, then picked objectives with precision. His strikes arrived swift, exact, and devastating. He used barely 100 bullets per kill, revealing exceptional marksmanship. Bong's final count of 40, confirmed victories, earned exclusively in P-38s, signified not just individual brilliance, but systematic advantage. His conquered enemies included battle-tested Japanese officers, incapable of matching the Lightning's performance edge. In one battle near Helandi, Bong downed 4 enemy fighters within minutes, executing flawless vertical technique that left foes unable to respond. Thomas Maguire extended the P-38's fighting ability further still. His tactical manual became standard across Pacific operations. Maguire stressed coordinated teamwork, with Lightning elements performing synchronized vertical scissors that trapped opposing fighters amid multiple attacking machines. His 38 victories, tallied between late August 1943 and early January 1945, proved the effectiveness of well-executed coordinated strikes. The P-38 kept developing throughout the campaign. The G variant delivered strengthened superchargers, preserving thrust beyond 30,000 feet. The H version equipped more powerful motors, generating 1,425 horses each. The J model shifted coolant containers into the fuselage pods, enhancing view and performance at altitude. The L variant introduced hydraulic-assisted control surfaces that boosted roll responsiveness. Each modification tipped the balance further toward American capability. The J series performed admirably at 35,000 feet, heights where Japanese flyers required breathing apparatus merely to remain operational. The L series improved roll response, negated the Zero's final compensating edge in flat turn performance. Come late 1944, nothing a Japanese fighter accomplished surpassed a P-38L. Japanese tactics turned increasingly desperate. Collision ramming, embraced as dignified though wasteful, expanded as traditional methods failed. Suicide strike formations got readied for one-direction runs. Some aviators endeavored to pull Lightnings into fog, where visibility challenges could remove the machine's advantage. These measures yielded occasional wins, but couldn't overcome basic technological disparity. The Philippines invasion of autumn 1944 showcased the P-38's mature capability. Lightning formations gained air command within days of landing. Japanese reinforcement attempts through the air became bloodbaths. On the 2nd of November 1944, P-38s from the 49th Fighter Group eliminated 26 adversary machines with no casualties. Victories of such proportions turned standard. The long-range bombing project against Japanese installations depended upon P-38 security. B-24 transports striking targets throughout the Southwest Pacific did so assured of lightning protection. Japanese fighters unable to climb to bomb altitude with P-38s present managed only fringe strikes. Military installations, petroleum terminals, and depot complexes got methodically demolished. The P-38 reconnaissance model, coded F-5, furnished vital information repeatedly. Operating at extraordinary elevations, minus weapons, but equipped with imaging tech, these camera-equipped variants catalogued each Japanese position across the theater. Their velocity and ceiling rendered them virtually uninterceptable. Intelligence they transmitted allowed specific subsequent bombing runs. By spring of 1945, Japanese air power across the Southwest Pacific essentially vanished. Surviving veteran aviators had relocated defending the homeland. Inexperienced replacements operating outmoded machines were expended in pointless rear-guard struggles. The Lightning had achieved not simply air command, but air mastery. The human expense imbalance astounded everyone. Spanning December 1942 through January 1945, P-38 outfits in the Southwest Pacific documented over 1,500 opponent machines destroyed in confirmed engagements. P-38 combat fatalities from adversary action stayed beneath 200. The ratio transcended 7-1, unmatched in air combat. Beyond mere figures, the Lightning's bearing changed everything. It established that advanced machinery, intelligently deployed, might surmount numerical odds and adversary experience. It demonstrated that controlling airspace involved regulating combat circumstances, not aerial maneuvers alone. It established that capacity to manufacture and educate mattered identically to bravery and expertise. Fighters from both sides carried lasting impressions of the Lightning, mixing reverence with recognition. American pilots admired its range of abilities, durability, and commanding technical advantages. Japanese aviators experienced it as the device that finished their dominance. That twin-engine phantom impossible to flee or evade. Maintenance teams recognized its strong construction and serviceability, regardless of sophisticated mechanics. The influence reached further than wartime. The Lightning shaped post-war airplane development globally. Vertical fighting tactics turned foundational in the jet era. Elevation and momentum, superseding turn capacity, affected everything from the F-86 to today's cutting-edge fighters. How the Lightning integrated machinery, maneuvers, and preparation became the cornerstone for fighter advancement. Lockheed's engineers under Clarence Kelly Johnson constructed beyond a combat-capable machine. They fundamentally restructured how aircraft engage overhead. The twin-engine design, created to accommodate the dual power plants and charging systems, delivered what one-engine machines couldn't accomplish. Its concentrated frontal guns bypassed the offset problems afflicting side-mounted weapons. The second motor offered emergency capability over enormous stretches of blue water. The aviators commanding the Lightning authored an unforgettable page of flying heritage. Bong's 40 confirmed kills established the American standard for air-to-air success. Maguire's 38 victories plus strategic teachings molded aviation theory for lifetimes ahead. Other Lightning experts demonstrated that supplied superior machinery plus thorough education, American aviators matched or surpassed adversaries in any aerial theater. Japanese aviators contending against the Lightning displayed remarkable courage, whilst circumstances turned progressively more dire. Piloting aging machines confronting crushing technological disadvantage, they persisted through long periods after winning, became mathematically impossible. Their observations of the Lightning's influence deliver irreplaceable historical understanding regarding how air operations evolved. Wreckage from both sides blankets, Pacific terrain, P-38s, and Japanese machines scattered from jungle floors to reef bottoms across New Guinea through the Philippines. Every crash scene embodies young men who battled and gave lives inside a competition reshaping world history. Communities still unearth ammunition, gauges, and belongings, demonstrating the ferocity of those aerial engagements. Galleries worldwide house preserved P-38 Lightnings. Rebuilt machines perform at exhibitions, their recognizable twin fuselage profiles capturing attention instantly. Former aviators assemble recounting expedition stories and honoring fallen companions. Scholars examine the campaigns determining the Lightning's significance. The machine that startled Japanese pilots throughout 1942 remains synonymous with American air accomplishment. Current military thought inherits wisdom gained above those tropical territories. Height and momentum remain foundational to aerial engagement. Advanced machinery requires matching doctrine and preparation. Manufacturing output and supply arrangements settle sustained combat operations. How intelligence, machinery, and performance interlinked, enabling the Yamamoto strike, continues representing the supreme model for concentrated assaults. Transformation spanning December 1942 through spring 1945 proved complete and unchangeable. Skies formerly dominated by the Zero transferred to the Lightning's command. Japanese carrier aviation, starting as arguably Earth's finest military force, underwent methodical dismantling. The Zero's reputation of invincibility crumbled beneath American machinery and education. Fundamentally, the Lightning's influence exceeded warfare outcomes. It embodied technological democracy's counter to authoritarian power. It verified that ingenuity could overcome convention, that machinery could overcome heritage, that coordinated superiority could outmatch individual brilliance. That twin-engine combatant, initially underestimated by opposition, fundamentally reforged air fighting. The Solomon Islands battleground, launching point of Lightning successes astonishing Japanese pilots, functioned as the forge for contemporary air engagement. All subsequent jet machines, all beyond eyesight missile strikes, all careful assaults coordinated by gathered intelligence, eventually descend from those tense tropical combats. The Lightning didn't merely vanquish competition, it reinvented air combat entirely. For Japanese pilots surviving encounters, memories persisted with extraordinary clarity decades afterward. Post-war recollections featured helplessness, observing twin-boom machines descending from unreachable heights. They discussed irritation over ideal attacking angles proving useless. The machine simply accelerated past reasonable leading calculations. They related watching mentors and associates eliminated one after another through an opponent that rewrote battle principles. American pilots' memories diverged sharply. They recalled confidence operating the Pacific's superior machine. They recollected pleasure executing graceful diving maneuvers while maintaining complete command of conflict parameters. They treasured twin-engine dependability, traversing immense waters, permanently maintaining controlling position. The Lightning didn't merely suppress Japanese capacity, it fundamentally restructured how sky battles operate. Overhead, the tropical Solomon Islands, from late 1942 through armistice, tomorrow's air strategy took form. Tomorrow's form served not fastest-turning combatants or most experienced pilots. Rather, nations fielding superior devices, schooling competent aviators, maintaining warfare durability. Through battle's conclusion, the Lightning methodically overwhelmed Japanese aviation throughout the theater. That paired-engine warrior Japanese aviators learned fearing erased their capability disputing atmospheric control. In accomplishing this, it assured American atmospheric dominance plus quickened Pacific War termination. Everything this twin-boom fighter inaugurated throughout those critical battles proceeds affecting aerial operations continuously. Testament to American originality alongside pilot gallantry, navigating the Lightning toward lasting recognition.